With a hidden recorder, he overheard me mocking him. His response changed everything. You know how they say you never know what you have till you lose it? Well, that saying is just so true. I lost everything. Everything I had on a platter of gold, all because I made a very bad decision, or, say, I made a bad-looking decision in the form of a man. Just one thing could ruin everything you've ever worked for. One thing, just one desire, and poof, your whole life is all gone. Hello, Reddit. My name is Adele, and I'm 32 years old. I was married to an amazing person, Joe. He was everything a woman could ever want. But despite that, my selfish desires still found their way into my beautiful happiness and struck, and now I'm just a single, scared, and empty woman who became a slave to her desires. Joe had always been in my life right from birth, but at a distance. I lived in a small town when I was younger with my family and 3 younger siblings, 2 girls and 1 boy excluding me. When I said small town, I meant so small that everyone knew everyone, and everyone was literally in each other's business, but we all related as one big, happy family. I grew up, of course, under the watchful gaze of my family, including the whole town, might I add. I attended one of the 2 schools in the community and was a good girl. I was the typical nerd with glasses on, skinny, head stuck in books, and always found in the library type, whereas Joe was the everyone's favorite type. He was the cute boy growing up, and then the handsome young guy that every girl had a crush on in class, including me. But Joe was 2 years older and ahead of me in class, so I was the junior, always daydreaming and scribing his name on notes without him knowing. He had lots of girls around, so there was no way I could even compete with the classy girls. Joe left for college later on, and I was sad but moved on pretty quickly. Then, in my final year in high school, I had a massive growth. From the thin, shapeless nerd to a full-bloomed, curvy body, I became the everyone wants to date type. I was happy with my growth, so I ditched the glasses, got lenses, and changed my clothes, because they obviously didn't fit my new body and style. I went to college, and at the end of my first year, I came back home with some friends of mine. Summer was usually extremely hot back home, so it was usually a good idea to swim as much as you could to help reduce the heat on your skin. And per usual, my friends and I had decided to go to the beach and go swimming that day to cool off. We got there, and I had excused myself to go get drinks for the girls and me when I bumped into a lean, muscular frame. Looking up to apologize, I realized that person was Joe. I was pleased to see him, and we exchanged contacts, and from then on, we picked things up. Joe finished earlier than I did from school, but waited till I was done to ask me to marry him. We got married in our hometown, and then went back to the city to start our lives. The first 3 years of being married were amazing. Joe had insisted I be a housewife, so I could take care of our kids properly when they do come, and I agreed. My friends were jealous of me, and I enjoyed it because they whined about their own work, and I was glad I didn't have to go through that. Until I grew bored. In the 4th year of our marriage, Joe was promoted, and though I was happy for him, the job description came with traveling for work. Joe started traveling a lot, leaving me at home for weeks most times, sometimes days, and I wasn't happy with that. But I couldn't complain too much because of the money I was squandering on expensive jewelry and clothes. And then again, he made up for it when he was back home and would take me out on fun dates. But then, when he wasn't around, all I did was hang out with my friends, which was only on weekends as they had work to do. And when we did hang out, all they discussed was how stressful work was and how envious they were of me not working. At that point, I wasn't happy they envied me again. I was becoming too bored with almost nothing to do except wait eagerly for Joe or my friends to be around. I took up a hobby of planting a garden, but I was hopeless at it, and within 2 weeks, all the flowers were dead. I didn't enjoy sports that much, so taking it up as a hobby was not an option. I started reading books, both educational and non-educational, but soon enough I got bored again. I took it up with Joe and insisted on working, but Joe wouldn't agree. Eventually, when he saw how unhappy I was, he suggested I study again, since I had mentioned it one time when we were dating that I'd like to have 2 degrees. I welcomed the idea with open arms and became busy searching for a new college and what course of study I wanted to go for. I eventually got accepted into a college that was both close to my home and the schedules were flexible. I remember I had been so happy, I called Joe, but his phone went straight to voicemail, which meant he was busy at work. Then I called my friends to inform them, but none of them were picking up either. I had only myself to celebrate with, so I ordered some food, brought out one of our finest wines. Joe was a wine lover, so we always had stacks of them at home, and drank a whole bottle. Believe me, I didn't ever try that again because the next day wasn't so good as my head tingled with any little noise I heard, so I was in bed all day that day. I started college again, excited for a new adventure. I made a couple of friends and hung out with them most times. It was not easy starting college again because I was obviously older than most of them, but they weren't freaked by it. I had a round oval face which made me look younger than I was at age 26. But it didn't matter as it helped me get the same treatment as others did. Well, that was where I met Max. Max was the popular kid in class, and every girl's dream, just like Joe was. He was quite attractive with his easy smiles that gave away his one-sided dimple and his deep brown eyes that flashed every time he grinned. He was charming and also smart. I knew he was trouble, and I was happy we weren't talking then, because he definitely caught my attention. But I wasn't a young girl just starting life anymore. I was married happily to Joe. Well, as fate would have it, he was friends with a friend of mine. So we had a mutual friend, and they had a study group that they read together for exams, and I sure wasn't surprised when I heard Max was also a part of the study group. We started studying together, and I found myself drawn to him. At first, I tried to brush it off, thinking I was just being friendly, but deep down, I knew I was attracted to him, and he made sure I knew that he knew I was attracted to him if his cocky grins were anything to go by whenever he came near me. I tried avoiding him. Believe me, I tried so hard, but how could you fight the temptation that's always right in your space? One fateful night, Max invited me to a party, and I accepted, despite knowing Joe wouldn't approve. But he was traveling per usual, so I made a verdict that what he didn't know couldn't hurt. I was excited when he had invited me out because it was the weekend, and I was already dreading staying at home alone, bored and without nothing to do again. So when he extended the invite to me, I jumped at the chance, even though I had some doubts if I was doing the right thing. But then I pushed it aside and went anyway. I wore a dark gray dress that's perfect for a night out. It was made of a comfortable, stretchy material that hugged my curves in all the right places. The dress was sleeveless and showed off my toned arms and had a subtle high-low hem that added a touch of sass. The neckline was rounded and soft, framing my face without revealing too much. I paired the dress with a pair of black ankle boots that added a bit of edge and height. My hair was let down, and I got a few loose waves framing my face. I kept my makeup simple, with a bold lip color that added a pop of color to my overall look. I felt confident and sexy, but still effortlessly cool. I loved that this dress made me feel like I was dressed up without trying too hard. The dress was a great example of a casual night party look that still catches the eye. The dark color, sleeveless design, and high-low hem all contribute to a flattering feminine silhouette. The stretchy material and comfortable boots made it perfect for a night of dancing and fun. The subtle makeup and loose hair add to the effortless, I'm not trying too hard vibe. Overall, this dress was perfect for a woman, me, who wanted to look great and have fun without looking like she's trying too hard to impress. Even though it was clear as day I was definitely trying to impress someone in particular, someone that was Max. Funnily, Joe had gotten me that dress because, in his words, he wanted me to dress beautifully for him on our next date, so I hadn't even worn it before. But I was clearly trying to impress Max, and I definitely got what I wanted. Max noticed me, all right. In fact, I didn't spend any time all through the party outside his presence. We had a few drinks, danced, and laughed together. I had so much fun that night. It felt like a release, a break from the monotony of my life. I was happy, and when Max had been summoned by a friend of his, I was feeling so giddy that I knew I had to exploit the energy. So I was out dancing again for maybe the 6th or 7th time. I don't know, I lost count because of how much fun I was having, and I remembered that someone had come up behind me and was dancing with me. Maybe because of the drinks I already had and was already tipsy. Maybe that was why I continued dancing seductively, acting like a female in heat. By then, the song had turned slow, and the person turned me around, and it was Max. I had blushed deeply and apologized for my behavior, and he had waved it off, saying he enjoyed dancing with me. We continued dancing, and I don't know, Maybe I should blame the attraction I already had towards him, or the drinks I had, because when Max had leaned forward and kissed me on the lips, I behaved wantonly and just wrapped my hands around his shoulder, kissing him back without hesitation. The guilt consumed me the next morning. I knew I had betrayed Joe's trust, and the weight of my actions crushed me. But I knew at that moment, even if I wasn't drunk, I wouldn't have done things differently, and that alarmed me. I was getting involved with someone that wasn't even my husband. I wondered what Joe would think if I told him, but I decided to keep mute about it, deciding that I had to tell Max it couldn't happen again because I was married and I loved my husband. It was harder than I thought, though, because every time I saw him, I was reminded of the kiss we shared, and my heart rate increased rapidly. Well, you know what they say, that what you love could kill you. I knew he was definitely not good for my heart, but I continued anyway, foolishly. It was later that week I got to have a private moment alone with Max. We had finished up our studying, and that day we had used Max's home for it because our usual spot was booked for the whole week, and Max offered for us to use his place. So when we were done, I had offered to stay back and help him clean. He didn't object, and neither did the others. When they had all gone, I helped him clean, and afterward asked to speak with him. I told him how whatever had happened last weekend couldn't happen again, and made up excuses about how much older than him I was, and that I was married and I loved my husband. Maybe it was because my mouth was speaking, and my heart wasn't following my line of speech, and Max too probably saw that because he just dragged me to himself and kissed me hard on the lips. I tried to push him away, but there's only so much temptation a girl could run away from, and I gave in, too easily. And just like that, we had sex. Mind-blowing one, might I add. It was nothing compared to what Joe and I had. Maybe because Max was younger and I clearly wasn't thinking right, but I had sex with him quite all right, regardless of whatever the reason might have been. After that, I had put on my clothes without a word to him and rushed out. I hurried home, discarded my clothes like hot coals, as if they were the ones who caused me to sin, took a hot shower, and then lay on my bed to process what had happened. But I didn't even have words to describe how I felt. It was guilt and desire all in one. I had just cheated on my husband, and yet I was still dreaming of Max and how he touched me. It was bizarre. I even had to skip school for a week, and when my friends called to check up on me, I came up with excuses that I was sick. Joe came home later that week and, as usual, tried to make up for leaving home for so long. But I wasn't excited by it. I was feeling guilty and at the same time giddy about what I had done. In fact, when Joe tried to touch me, I was imagining it to be Max, so I made him stop, making excuses of being stressed out by school. Of course, my ever-understanding Joe bought the lie hook, line, and sinker and just cuddled me. Once he was asleep, I lay there in his arms thinking about Max. When I went back to school, Max pursued me actively, saying he couldn't help how he felt. I was torn between my love for Joe and this new, exciting connection with Max. Joe's travels became more frequent, and I found myself seeking comfort in Max's company. And very soon, we were, more like I became, addicted to Max. I looked forward to spending time with him, so I would look for different reasons to do just that. Even when Joe was around, and I couldn't spend time with Max as I would love, I'd make up excuses about schoolwork that needed urgent attention and would go over to Max's place. Joe was like ice cream itself, but Max was the extra toppings on it. I felt guilty, especially because I was cheating on Joe, but at that point, my guilt didn't even matter to me, as I was already far too into it to stop. The second sin I committed aside from cheating on Joe was getting pregnant. Don't get me wrong, it was not the pregnancy that was the issue. It was what I did afterward that was. My period had been late, and I was feeling really funny, especially in the mornings, so I bought some pregnancy tests, and it came out positive. I was conflicted as to who exactly I was pregnant for, so I went to the hospital to get tested, and it turned out I was pregnant for 6 weeks already. Calculating back, I realized the baby would belong to Joe. He had been home for that week throughout, and I had no excuse to make to go see Max so as not to rouse Joe's suspicion. I stayed home that week until Joe was safely out of town before I went back into the arms of my lover. So the baby definitely had to belong to Joe. I was conflicted. I didn't know what I wanted. When I had been so bored earlier in our marriage, I had hoped so much for a baby, so at least I could get my hands full with its presence. But getting pregnant then was bad timing, especially as there were my studies to finish up and then Max. Surprisingly, at that moment, I wasn't even considering Joe's feelings. I knew he had always wanted a child, but he didn't say because he didn't want to pressure me. I was thinking only of what I wanted, the freedom I was supposedly enjoying with Max, and I didn't want to risk it. I told Max about the baby first, and, as expected, he wasn't happy. He convinced me to abort the baby, and I did. Well, he didn't exactly tell me directly what I should do, but he did do enough to convince me that having a baby at that time meant jeopardizing our relationship. I know, I was stupid and foolish for making such a decision, but at that time I wasn't even clearly thinking. The mistake I made then was that I had the abortion at the clinic where Joe and I used. I went over to Max's place to recuperate for some days, and would have been longer if Joe hadn't called to ask where I was. Apparently, he finished working earlier than usual and decided to come home to his beautiful wife. His words. I lied that I was with a friend and we were having girl time, but when he offered to pick me up when I was done, I refused and told him I would come home immediately. I literally rushed home, and when I did get home, I got the surprise of my life when I saw Joe come out of our bathroom holding the pregnancy kit I had used before going to the hospital that day. I didn't dispose of it. Joe was so happy and hugged and kissed me several times with tears in his eyes that I couldn't even say anything to ruin that moment for him. He was saying then that how it was no wonder I was asking when he was coming home and how I told him I couldn't wait to see him. I was texting for a different reason, but Joe wanted us to go to the hospital together to test if the baby was growing okay, and I told him I had already gone and everything was perfect, which wasn't technically a lie as I did go, but went again afterward for a different reason, but he obviously didn't know that then. I continued with the pretense for a month as Joe refused to travel for any work issues, even if I told him to go. The most he was gone for was a day, and it was frustrating pretending to be delicate when you're not. I had to rush to the bathroom every morning, remembering to lock the bathroom door with the excuse of I didn't want him to see me puking and pretend to puke and flush. Then coming out to the same crackers. I didn't like them one bit, but I had to keep up the act if I didn't want to break Joe's heart. He was so obsessed with keeping me healthy for the baby's sake that I began to eat healthy. Who likes eating healthy at all? But then he ensured my cravings were satisfied once a day. That was the only good part. I didn't even get to see Max as often as I would have liked, and it made me more irritable. So at the end of the first month of staying at home nearly every day with me, he had to go for an emergency trip and was going to be back the next day. I went over to Max's place and I explained how frustrating it was staying home and pretending to still be pregnant and asked for suggestions on how to end the whole charade. Because I knew soon enough, when my tummy didn't expand in size, Joe would begin to suspect me because I was quite chubby, and it was impossible not to be bloated when pregnant. Joe and I had even joked about it earlier on in our marriage. Max suggested I miscarry in a dramatic way, because if I just told him I miscarried just like that, it would make him suspect me. We agreed on me paying someone to do a hit-and-run job on me, so in that process I would actually miscarry the baby. It was an extreme action, but I had to because Joe wasn't exactly an easy man to convince, except he saw evidence for himself. I gave Max money to pay the driver, and we set the whole thing. The timing, arrival, and calling 911 services. I was anxious, and I was right to be because the driver hit me so hard. I thought I had died and gone to heaven or maybe hell. Most definitely hell because my sins were grievous. I lost consciousness for the whole of 5 hours, so I was told. And when I woke up, I was surprised to see Joe beside my bed holding my hand. I just started crying because I couldn't believe I could have lost my life over something I paid someone for. Joe probably thought I was crying for the loss of the baby when he told me that the baby was gone, because he just held my hands tight, pain evident on his face, and didn't say anything. Apparently Max had brought me in and paid a nurse off to tell Joe I lost a baby. After that incident, Joe's attitude changed towards me. He was still caring, but a bit rigid. I didn't even know what was wrong. I knew that he hadn't found out about my affair, but it bothered me seeing him like that. Whenever I asked, he would just wave it off as work problems that I didn't need to bother about. But instinctively, I knew that wasn't all there was to it. I thought maybe the loss of the baby had affected him that much, and I regretted at that moment why I aborted the baby. I didn't stop seeing Max, though. I couldn't. He was an addiction that you know is bad but couldn't do without. Like a craving, especially a pregnant woman's cravings. Sorry, I shouldn't have used that analogy because I obviously ruined the chances of that happening for me. But then I couldn't help my feelings when I was with Max. I still loved my husband, but that didn't stop my insane strong desires to be with Max. Well, that was until everything came crashing down. Everything that I have ever known and loved just dispersed like they never existed, and I was left with the memories of what could have been. With a hidden camera, he, Joe, overheard me mocking him with my lover, and his response changed everything. Let me explain how it all happened. Joe wasn't traveling as frequently as he did again, and it made seeing Max all the more difficult. So that day, I wasn't in the best of moods, and Joe wasn't helping as he mostly just decided to stay in his study for hours working instead of traveling as he did before, and it made me angry and frustrated. By the time it was evening, I was so frustrated and lonely that I had picked up my bag and, without informing him, left the house to go see Max. And as usual, I left Max's place later in the night happy and feeling less lonely. I knew I was going to have to work something up to tell Joe because I even switched off my phone so he wouldn't reach me. When I got to the house, it was dark, and I fumbled for my keys and knew that Joe might have probably gone to bed, which was definitely unusual because Joe normally wouldn't sleep out of worry that he didn't know where I was. But given his new character these days, it was possible. It bothered me, but I just shrugged it off and eventually opened the door, reached for the light switch, and flipped it, and immediately, light flooded the room. My heart was in my throat the next second when I saw Joe on the cushion sitting in the dark, his head between his hands that rested on his knees. I had cleared my throat and moved towards him, my heart still racing, and asked him what he was doing sitting in the dark. But he didn't respond, only lifted his head slowly and looked at me. His eyes, I remember vividly, were red and reflected the pain he felt, and I stood there speechless, just staring at his eyes. I didn't realize he had a small chip in his hand until he pressed it, and the sound of my laughter filled the room. It was me and Max talking about Joe. Max had been mocking Joe and referring to him as a man who couldn't even make a woman happy, a beautiful one at that, and I had laughed at that, hugging him to myself and then kissing him. Soon enough, my moans filled the room from the recorder, and it was like my body received the strength it needed, and I tried to snatch it out of his hands, but he just stood up and moved away from me. I tried to catch his hand again with the I can explain theory, but he snatched his hand out of my grip like I disgusted him, and then told me he knew everything I had been doing. Apparently, the day I had the accident, he had been called, and he had rushed down to see me only to be informed by a fidgeting nurse that I had lost the baby, and he was suspicious and went to see the doctor. There he was told that I had been pregnant truly, but had had an abortion done 2 days after finding out, and had lied that my husband consented to it. He had a private investigator follow me and report all my movements to him. So, as he wanted to file for a divorce and knowing that I'd probably be given his money, he wanted evidence that I was cheating on him so I would get nothing from him, and he had planted the camera in my bag without me knowing, patiently waiting for when I'd step out and step into my lover's arms. And I stepped willingly into that trap. There was no denying what I had done. There was evidence against me already, and I know saying sorry wouldn't cut it. But I still tried. I got on my knees and pleaded for forgiveness, but he just took one look at me on the floor and ignored me totally, leaving me on the floor there to cry my heart out. I didn't sleep through the night. I was there pondering on how much I had come to lose already, and by morning Joe had freshened up and got ready to leave the house. He told me he would be traveling but returning that same day, and wanted to see any trace of me in the house gone, and the only way he would contact me was through his lawyer to get the divorce papers across to me. My life is ruined. I cannot bear the thought of losing Joe. I now realize that life without Joe was never going to be the same, and not even the thought of Max helped me get rid of the feeling of dread I had. Please help me. Any advice of any sort on what to do to get back Joe? I cannot lose him. Please help me. I love him very much. I know what I've done to him was despicable, but please help me. Update. Hey Reddit, it's Adele here. It's been a while since I last posted, and I know what I did was wrong, but you are focused more on just blaming me. I blamed myself already, but you people made me hate myself more. It's been 3 months now. I'm officially divorced and also penniless. Joe left me nothing as he promised. Though I know I deserved nothing, as thinking back, I realized I never added anything to his life. I just spent his money, sat around, and did nothing useful for him. He tried all his possible best to make up for everything he was lacking, but I never tried on my own part. I didn't see all his efforts. All I saw was my own selfishness and how to just satisfy my desires. I didn't do anything to make our lives better. Instead, I destroyed the one thing we shared. No, actually the 2 most important things we should have shared: love and our child. Almost absently, I would rub my stomach and imagine a baby still there. Maybe then Joe wouldn't have cut me off so brutally. Maybe I'd have a chance to win him back and make up for everything I've done. Funny how hard Joe had tried to make our marriage work by offering that I travel with him, but I refused, making excuses that I'd be bored while he worked. I wish now so badly that I had taken him up on the offer. At least I would have explored different parts of the world, and it would have made up for the loneliness instead of what I eventually did. For those people asking about Max, turns out that Max was, after all, only after the money I gave him. Yes, he was a gold digger who left me when he realized I had nothing left. He even went around telling people that I, a married woman, seduced him, and now I've lost them both. My husband when he realized I was cheating, and him when he realized how I had been sleeping around. A big lie, as he was the only one I was having an affair with. But everyone bought his story hook, line, and sinker, and avoided me, even the friends I thought I had. I had to quit school eventually because I had no money to pay for necessities. My parents refused to speak to me and forbade my siblings from doing the same. They wanted nothing to do with a daughter who would treat her husband that way. I can't even blame them. I ruined their reputation in that small town of ours when news of my failed marriage got across to them. So I had to sell most of my expensive jewelry, shoes, and clothes to be able to feed and get a very small apartment to stay in. The apartment was leaking, and I could hear different movements, especially at night because it was badly soundproofed. But at the moment, I had no choice but to bear with it. Seeking a job with my previous degree sounded like a long-time plan, which I didn't need because that meant spending more money on going to places for interviews, so I just got 2 part-time jobs instead. One as a waitress in a minibar, and the other as a shop attendant. I rotated my shifts and worked tirelessly so that when I had time to sleep, I would do so effortlessly, but it didn't even happen that way. You know when your body is so tired and all it needs is rest, but your mind is actively awake and pondering on things you could have done better, and life would have been so much better if you hadn't done things the way you did them. I would sit and stare into the dark at night and just stay there. The darkness my only comfort. I didn't exactly believe that depression and loneliness went hand in hand until now. They were my companions. I avoided staring at mirrors. In fact, I had none in my home to avoid seeing what was left of me. I was sure I looked skinny and probably had huge eye bags that were like permanent features on me already. Losing Joe made me realize just how badly I hurt him. I still would always remember his eyes. When he had looked at me with such disgust and hatred. Those eyes haunt me every day of my life, and I feel like living on would be very hard. I've become a nobody. Just a matter of existing and taking up space, a dark, empty space. I cannot even forgive myself for killing our love, and most especially our baby. So I know that trying to seek his forgiveness was futile. Now, all I'm left with is to pick up the pieces of my shattered life, wondering how I let my greediness and desire for excitement destroy the perfect love I had with Joe. Trying to even move on had very little success, because the pain of losing him forever is a constant reminder of my mistakes. I really wish I had done things better and not behaved wantonly and sought attention where I wasn't supposed to in the first place. Update. Hey Reddit, this is my very last post here. Just wanted to appreciate y'all for reading my posts. The hate and the backslashing I received were enough to fuel the pain and agony I relive every day, but I'm still thankful for them, and no to every question you might have on your mind. I'm not better. I don't feel like I've done anything to move on, and I'm not trying to. I'm stuck in the past, and I think I'll forever be. I'm a sinner, and I will pay dearly for the sins I've committed against Joe and an innocent child. I will forever curse the day I met Max and all his temptations. I regret every moment now. I feel disgusted that I felt alive and excited about those moments I spent with him, but thinking back then, I didn't know I was digging my own grave, and I wish I had done things better and in a different way. I know Joe is living good now. I'm only able to guess because I see his posts every now and then on social media, and though he never returned any single one of my texts, he made sure I knew he was punishing me by reading them and purposely not replying. I wish that I am part of the life he has now, but I know how impossible that is. So I've accepted my cruel fate that I brought upon myself. Some words of advice: don't make the same mistakes I did. Thanks and bye.